Pasuk Yud Beis. Yom Hashem El Moshe Lemor Ato Tidaber B'nei Yisrael Lemor Acha Shabsos Tishmoru. You must keep the Shabbos. You must observe the Shabbos. We'll see in a moment. Although they have an obligation to build the Mishkan, and it's of the utmost value because this is to be the full reinstatement that the Shechina should dwell in our midst. So you would think that the creative activity that was needed for the Mishkan would supersede the Shabbos. Ach is a limitation. You must observe the Shabbos. Rashi says, although you're pressured and you're pursuing to do the work with alacrity, Shabbos al tidochem miponeo. But Shabbos should not be overridden, superseded, because of the creative activity that has to be done for the Mishkan. Now, let's understand something. We explained that, firstly, why do we keep the Shabbos? Because we are testament to the world that God's the creator. As God was created for 7 days and refrained on the seventh day, we, being his people, must be the testament to the world that we represent him. So therefore, Hashem allows us to be creative in the physical sense for 6 days, and we refrain on the seventh day. But as we explained, it's even more than that. What exactly is the building of the Mishkan? The building of the Mishkan is the microcosm of creation, of existence. So in every aspect, every detail of the Mishkan, the creative activities correspond to the forces which Hashem had released to bring about all aspects of physical creation, terrestrial, celestial, everything was included in those forces which he released. The Mishkan corresponds to every one of those forces, and this is the physical representation of those forces within the context of being creative. So it's understood. If we are the testament to the world that Shabbos, we must refrain. So when we ourselves are creating creation, it's a replication of creation, the creative process. What should be that process? It should not violate the Shabbos. Because on Shabbos, God refrained from creation. It's not the date for creation, okay? Therefore, regardless of how important the Shabbos is, the whole objective of the Mishkan is that God should dwell in this existence. But this is pre-existence. Existence doesn't work. You're creating existence. Therefore, Shabbos should not be superseded, should not be overridden for the sake of the building of the Mishkan. That's ach, eshab sosei tishmoru. You must, as important as the building Mishkan is, but in regard to Shabbos, even that should not be superseded. We find that, and this has to do with the laws of Kodshim, the service in the Mishkan, that anything that has to be brought on a specific day, even though that day may be Shabbos, that korban is done, or that activity is done. For instance, there's a korban tomid, there's a communal offering that has to be brought twice a day, every day of the week, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Tomid shel shachar, tomid shel bein harboim. The Torah says it must be brought. That means including Shabbos. The Musaf of Shabbos must be brought. The Korban Pesach, if the 14th falls out on Shabbos, and the 15th is Motzei Shabbos. When do you slaughter the Korban Pesach? You slaughter the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, because the Torah says it must be brought. So there we find that we're actually doing creative activity, slaughtering, skinning the animal, salting it, sacrificing it. All these are activities that are not permitted. Outside of the activity of service, these are blatant violations of Shabbos. But yet, within the context of the Mishkan or the Beis Hamikdash, all this is permitted. The question is why? The answer is as we're explaining. The Mishkan itself is a replication of creation. Creation has no relevance to Shabbos. The day of Shabbos, God refrained from being creative. Once the Mishkan is created, and this is part of the function of existence, even though it's Shabbos, since the service has to do directly with Hashem, therefore you're doing it on behalf of God. This is a separate thing. This is not creating creation. Therefore, once the Mishkan is in place and the Shechina is there, this is for God. This is not creating a domicile for God, which is creation, which is the equivalent of existence, but rather existence exists, and this is something we must do within existence. For instance, Pikuach Nefesh supersedes the Torah in entirety, regardless of what day of the week it is. Because God says that the value of a life has such great value, you must live by the Torah, not die by the Torah. Therefore, the value of the Jewish life supersedes the Shabbos, regardless. Once the Mishkan is there, what is the obligation of the Jew in terms of his relationship to Hashem? You must bring certain korbanos, certain sacrifices, which must be brought on the Shabbos, regardless that it's the Shabbos. It's no different than any other thing. A child is born on Shabbos, he's circumcised on the Shabbos, because that's the law. Because he has to be circumcised on the 8th day, regardless. Whether it's Shabbos, whether it's Yom Kippur, he's circumcised on that day. But in terms of bringing about the Mishkan, there has to be a refrain. You must observe it even within the context of building the Mishkan, as important as it may be. Just one moment. Why? Ki osi beinu veinechem l'doraisechem. It's a sign of distinction between myself and yourselves for all generations. Lodas, to know. Ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. I am God who sanctifies you. Now, what is Lodas? It's a sign between me and you for all generations. Lodas means that we should know, or that the world should know. So Rashi himself explains, Ki osi beinu veinechem, os gedulhi beinenu, shebacharti bochem. This is a sign of distinction, a great sign of distinction, that I chose you. Ba'atchil lochem es menuchosi, that I gave you over the day of my rest, the day of my refrain, limenucha. Now this is very important. I would say that why is it a sign of distinction that I've chosen you? If Rashi, let's say, would have stopped right there, I would have said that since we were chosen to be the testament to the world, that God is the creator, and we have to continuously emulate him, being creative for 6 days and the 7th day, refraining on the 7th day, that's a sign of distinction, because we are the ones who were chosen to be God's representation in existence. But Rashi says more than that. Why is it a sign of distinction he chose us? Because I gave you over, I transferred over to the day of my rest, menuchosi, limenucha, for menucha. Now, why is Shabbos called Yom Menucha? We read at the beginning of creation, it says, Bo Shabbos, Bo Menucha. Shabbos came, and that was the ultimate level of what? Of rest, of tranquility, rest. It wasn't a day, creation was no longer in process. It's menucha. What's the menucha? So if you take a look in the Midrash, as we said, all the activities of the Mishkan correspond to creation. At the time of creation, 6 days God was in the creative mode, releasing energies, bring about existence, creation. Now, what does the menorah represent? The menorah represents illumination. On the 7th day after the world was created, he completed, you know what happened? God entered into existence. The Shechina, his presence entered into existence, and it says all existence began glowing. It began glowing because that had to happen. That was the ultimate energy source, that when God enters, everything begins functioning at the most optimum level. That relationship, that's the menucha. Menucha means a person's at peace, at rest, everything functions perfectly. That's menucha. Bo Shabbos bo menucha. Originally, when Shabbos came, it was menucha. Because when God attached himself to all existence, and all existence had relevance to that presence, that was the ultimate level. That relationship, or that sense of what that is, that was given to us. We have relevance to the presence of the Shechina. You know, the Gemara says, Shabbos is me'ein olam haba. Shabbos itself has a semblance of the world to come. What is the world to come? The world to come is a relationship with Hashem. So Shabbos, it's a semblance of that relationship. That's what Shabbos is. When Shabbos comes, the Jew himself is connected and attached to God's presence, which the world is not. Although God enters into creation, the non-Jew has no relevance to the Shabbos whatsoever. The Gemara says, now the Jew himself, which Jew has relevance to the Shechina to be able to have that relationship? Only if you keep the Shabbos. A Jew who does not keep the Shabbos, although the Shechina is here, you're not connected to that Shechina. It's like Olam Haba. Olam Haba, the world to come, is the neshama has a relationship with God, it's able to cleave to God. That's only if you're worthy to be there. But if you're not worthy to be there, you have no connection to God. Shabbos itself, God's presence enters into existence. If you observe the Shabbos properly, then you attach to that. If a person does not observe the Shabbos, you disconnect. There's a disconnect. You have no relevance to the Shechina. So when is it menucha? It's only yom menucha. If a person observes the Shabbos, then it's mein olam haba. It's like the soul that's worthy, that merits to have that relationship. And therefore, the Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah and Sanhedrin, Akum sheshavos chayv misa. A non-Jew who observes the Shabbos, he's liable for the death penalty. What does that mean? Could you imagine? You have a king, and he has his palace, and the only people that are permitted to enter into his palace, into the inner sanctum palace, are only his children, which all have his pedigree. And a person comes, an imposter, and he dresses as if he's part of the family, enters there. The word is trespassing is an understatement. It's a breach of something. You're entering into a zone which you don't belong in that zone. It's punished by death. You're observing the Shabbos because that's the prerequisite even for the Jew to connect to that. And you, a non-Jew, that's only if you're qualified to have the relationship. If you meet certain criteria, you can be a beneficiary of that relationship. But if you're not that person, your soul is not that soul, because you weren't chosen by God, you have no relevance. That's what Rashi says. It's a sign of distinction, great sign of distinction, that I chose you, that I've given you my yom menucha, limenucha. That's only the Jew has that. That's the great sign of distinction. Anyone else who tries to partake of that, it's punished by death. Because it's actually going into a zone and trying to be part of something which you have no relevance to. Okay? That's the understanding. Ladas. Now this is it. To know ki ani Hashem mekaddishchem. Who has to know? Hu'umos, but the nations have to know. Ki ani Hashem mekadeschem. Why does the Jew only have relevance to that relationship? That when Hashem enters into his existence, only we could cleave to him, and we can only enter into the inner sanctums of having that relationship. That's the sign of a distinction that Hashem has sanctified us. And as we always say, what is the basis for Kedusha? Kedusha means wherever God is at. Sinai, the Shechina was there, the mountain was holy. He departed from that location, the mountain was a piece of rock. So what is the basis? When we, at Sinai, we became Goy Kadosh. We became a holy nation because God took us eternally at that moment to have that connection, that relationship with us, which cannot be in any way terminated. It's an immutable relationship. It's a continuous, eternal relationship. So that you have the Shabbos, that you're able to partake of God's presence in this world on the seventh day, which is Menucha, that's a sign of distinction that I've given you by Menucha, which is that attachment.